Yo ho, avast and ahoy, mateys. It's Ask Chuck Dixon number 40, where I answer questions asked by you about what it is I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And if you have a question for me, Chuck Dixon, your genial host, you can send them directly to brunobookstore@gmail.com. You can also leave questions right under this video you're watching at this very moment, or join me on Facebook and ask questions there. But the Bruno Bookstore pathway is the most direct because I look at it every day and consider your questions. So here we go with the first question. It's from Renee Tepa. I'm guessing at that last name, Renee. How and why did you get started to write the Catwoman series? What do you think of her character in general, and what makes her a great character from your point of view? Well, I started on Catwoman when we were in the middle of Nightfall, and the current Catwoman writer, we all had a part to play. Every Bat book was a piece of the Nightfall puzzle. And the then writer on Catwoman, the regular writer, failed to fulfill the needs of a certain issue, the requirements of that issue to play a part in the larger story. And I was asked by Denny O'Neil to do a ghost rewrite of that issue to bring in more Nightfall elements. And I guess because of that, when the then current writer left, they sort of tossed it to me to write for a while. But it was always with the understanding that I would never be the long-term regular writer on Catwoman. For whatever reason. I think they just thought I had enough work with already having 4 ongoing titles, but they needed me to pinch hit. And I did love working on it. I loved working with Jim. He's such an enthusiastic guy. He was so into the book. As you can tell, I mean, he was on the book for a very, very long time, and it was successful with his artwork, and deservedly so. But I really enjoyed writing Catwoman, mostly because of all the comic book heroes in the superhero genre. Catwoman is well, she's not really a hero; she's an anti-hero. Catwoman is the only character that I've ever run across who seems happy with themselves. They seem comfortable in their own skin. Catwoman likes what she does, and she's it makes her a cool character. I mean, she's a criminal, a super criminal, but she's so upbeat and indefatigable. And the other thing that made the series interesting was, for me, I love a heist story, and every issue I wrote was to some degree or another a heist story or a con artist story or something. She was involved in a crime. She wasn't holding places up with guns. No, she's sneaking around. She's using her mind. She's got a plan uh, to to get to the cash, to get to the gems. Whatever the loot is, she's going to get to it. So I loved heist stories. So this was an excuse to write heist stories from the point of view of the heister, and those are the best ones. It wasn't Batman and Robin chasing somebody around. It was the criminal planning the whole crime from point A to point Z, and then all of the deconstruction plotline elements that are always involved in a good heist story. It was challenging and fun. I really, really did enjoy writing this character a lot. And my favorite was the Catfile arc, and getting Catwoman into a sham marriage. This is by far my favorite Catwoman cover ever. It's just so silly and fun. And yeah, getting Selina married, hooked up with some guy as part of a con, a European nobleman, so she could get it as loot. Yeah, had a blast on that title. Next question. I've heard people say superhero comics are a power fantasy and military stories like G.I. Joe are a loyalty fantasy. Do you agree? If that's true, what type of fantasy do you think Western comics were? What about Conan? Well, I think superheroes, as I've said before, are a childhood wish fulfillment fantasy. And it's a natural thing for a kid who's basically powerless, a child, to think, what if I was big and rough and tough, and I could push people around. or I wouldn't have to put up with this, or I could fix a problem that I saw, and I would have a say, and people would listen to me because I'm a big, powerful guy in a skin tight outfit and a cape, and I can fly. What kid doesn't want to fly? Um, but I agree with you. GI Joe is a loyalty fantasy. GI Joe and Cobra as well are brotherhoods, and that loyalty that to each other is very much at the heart of GI Joe, as devised by Larry Hama. He wanted to show how serving in the military, serving under uncomfortable, dire, and often dangerous situations, uh, brought people together, brought a bond closer than family, closer than a marriage, because they relied on each other for their lives. And Larry had served, and he understood this. He had served in the military, and he understands that bond and what it means. So when I wrote GI Joe, I was very careful to preserve all of that. I mean, I understood that GI Joe is the best of our military. They're loyal, semper fidelis, loyal forever, and they're tough, and they're brave, and they're courageous, and they're resourceful, and at their heart they're good. They're interested in doing good, and it's a military fantasy, but you're right, it is a loyalty fantasy. Now, Western comics, I mean, in their heyday, you can't really talk about Western comics today because there's very few Western comics in the United States, and the Western comics in Europe are either historical adventures, or they very much reflect the West of Hollywood. They're more adult themed, and by that I don't mean a lot of sex or graphic violence. They're just more maturely themed. But in their heyday, Western comics, which sold huge through the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, they are childhood wish fulfillment, just like superheroes. Because remember, to kids of my generation and older, the cowboy was every bit as much a fantasy figure as the superhero. And you would play at being a cowboy far more often than you'd ever play being a superhero. You couldn't find kids that wanted to pretend to be Batman or Superman. But, if you wanted to play, you know, Bat Masterson and Cochise, yeah, you could get a game up. You could get a neighborhood shootout going. But yeah, I think it was, about, riding and shooting and being on your own and not having to go to bed early. That was, all the cowboy fantasies, hanging with your friends and owning a horse. It was very much, you know, a boy and girl fantasy in the 50s, the 40s, and through much of the 60s. Now, Conan is kind of an adolescent fantasy. Conan is the fantasy figure you glom onto when you discover girls. And because it's an adolescent fantasy, most guys never let go of it because you could be my age and you're still an adolescent at heart. So yeah, you're gonna get the girl, you're gonna kill the bad guy, and you're not gonna take crap from anybody. That's the Conan fantasy, and I think that's the attraction toward barbarism. And barbarism is cool if you're the toughest guy in the room. It's not so much fun if you're not. But yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're GI Joe. You're on the money with GI Joe. Ben Baker again, a Ben Baker double spin. Have you been an editor for anyone else? If so, how did it go? If not, do you think you'd like or hate it? If you could be the editor for one series in any medium, what would you choose, and what would be the main changes you'd recommend? Um, I'm going to answer part of that. I was officially an editor for a while at CrossGen. Now, at CrossGen, we didn't have editors. We had, we had sort of a front office, and Mark Alessi was the last word on everything, unless you could sneak something past him without him knowing, which didn't happen very often. But for the most part, the writers were their own editors, or each other's editors, I should say, because we paid close attention to what each other were doing. And there was a lot of commingling of editing and proofing and everything done amongst the writers and amongst the entire cruise. Every book was proofread by 3 different crews of people before it went to the publisher. So everyone had a say in the final product. Uh, but we had a program called Code 6 in which we were bringing in people from the outside to bring in their own creator-owned projects. And each writer was assigned to be an editor of one of them. So I was assigned to edit a book called The Crossovers. It was a book by Robert Rhodey, and I loved it. I really did. I loved it. It was about a family who were each member of the family, the wife, the father, the mother, the daughter, the son, were all characters from a different genre. And they all had secret identities that they kept from each other. So you had superhero, spy, whatever. And they all lived together, but kept their secret identities from each other. And it's a crazy concept, but and I don't know how Robert did it, but he did. It was a balancing act every issue to keep these 4 separate genres and multiple subplots going. And I was his editor, and really, I didn't have much to do. I was very hands off. I mean, there wasn't anything for me to do. These scripts were perfect, and the art was wonderful. I mean, Joe Staton. What are you going to complain about Joe Staton, right? Big Joe Staton fan. Ernie Colon on inks. I mean, it was a dream team. It was a dream team. So as an editor, have I ever really been an editor? No. I probably wouldn't make a good editor because if I was working for someone who wasn't as talented as Robert Rhodey, I'd be tempting to rewrite everything, stick my oar in too much. So yeah, I've never been an editor. Full time. I was actually offered the group editorship of the Batman titles at DC when Denny O'Neil retired. He offered the job to me personally, and the job was mine if I wanted it. But I couldn't afford the pay cut or the move to New York. So I turned it down. What might have been, we'll never know. Renee again. Renee Tepas, I got another pass at your name. Which story do you like the most that you've done, and what kind of story would you have liked to have written? Would you like to write that hasn't been done yet? I've written so many things that I really enjoyed. I've always had a great time. I mean, Catwoman, I loved writing Catwoman. I loved writing those heist stories. But, I got to try my hand, and I continue to get to try my hand at different genres, different kinds of stories. I mean, Pirate Batman, I've said before, was a huge kick for me. Generally getting to do lots of stuff in the Batman universe, sort of pushing the envelope with things like Batman versus Predator and other Elseworlds projects. And of course, create our own stuff like Winterworld was a tremendous opportunity, to get to work with an artist as talented as Jorge Zafino. Mostly, the key to enjoying writing for a publisher, for a publishing house, is having your editor have faith in you, finding editors that have faith in you, and then you can, work miracles. Way of the Rat, a period martial arts film, not period martial arts film, a period martial arts comic was a lot of fun to work on. Getting to work with Jeff Johnson and the crew at CrossGen. It was a challenging book to work on, and I think of all the CrossGen things I did, it was the closest collaboration, which I always enjoy. Everybody had a say in how the book looked, and the end result was, terrific because of that. I mean, I enjoyed all of my work at CrossGen, but this was paramount among all of them. And I like writing the funny stuff. I had quite a long run, with The Simpsons, kind of an off again, on again relationship. I do a few issues here, a few issues there, but I always got a kick out of it, and I liked investing myself in that world, learning more about that world, and it was a kick to work on. I enjoyed it. Now, genres I haven't written in, I've discussed this, I think, a little before. I'd love to write a romance book. Um, it's the only genre I really haven't written in. Of course, there really aren't any romance books anymore, but I'd still like to try my hand at the genre should it ever come back. I don't know what form a romance book would take these days in this era of, gender confusion and gender fluidity and political correctness. I don't know how all of that would work. Maybe I could just write a period bodice ripper. They always seem popular. a romance novel set in the past, so I don't have to deal with today's um, sometimes labyrinthian mores. Okay, next question. James Mealy. Hey, James. What two comic characters that you've never worked on would you like to do a team up crossover book with, and what would you do in it? How would you get them together plot wise? Well, I don't know if I'm going to go into that much depth, but you know very well that I am a crossover whore. The problem is that there's not a lot of characters I like that I haven't gotten to write, so it doesn't leave a whole lot of choices of characters that we can put together. I mean, Little Lulu meeting Plastic Man is a bit unlikely, although they're two of my favorite characters. But, actually, now that I think about it, Tubby and Woozy Winks together, that'd be a hell of a comic. But to take your question with the seriousness and the level of geekiness that it deserves, if I was ever to bring together two characters that I'd never written, I'd be tempted to do Sergeant Rock meeting Sergeant Fury. Now, I've written a little bit of Sergeant Rock, maybe I think 20 pages, but I've never written Fury. And I think it would be cool to see the juxtaposition between the dour, humorless Rock and the more bombastic, freewheeling, easily riled Sergeant Fury. To see the combination of those two characters uh, coming together on a mission. The deconstructed plot line that would follow would be quite amazing. And of course, having, the Howlers, who were, colorful to say the least, meet Easy Company, who I think were a bit more grounded in reality. The contrast in strategy and tactics and attitude would be amazing. And I think the story would be worth it just for a fist fight between Dum Dum Dugan and Bulldozer. So that would be fun. Now, if I was to pick two characters to meet in a crossover from all of fiction, I would have to go with Mad Max and Snake Plissken. Um, I, I'd, I, you know, I'd sacrifice a lot to write a story with these two characters in it together, and I think the timeline would work. I think in my mind, they exist in the same universe. Uh, you know, and how awesome would that be? Okay, Mr. Immortal 1231. I would like to know about the Wheel of Time comic you did and your thoughts on Robert Jordan. Cheers. Well, cheers to you. Yeah, I did quite a bit of Robert Jordan stuff. Eye of the World, Wheel of Time, a couple of other things. And fantasy is not my thing. Let me just say this. I was talking to a rather popular fantasy author recently, and I was quite honest with him. I said that fantasy genre wasn't really my thing, that I couldn't understand why anyone, would write fantasy post Tolkien. To me, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are kind of the last word on the genre. Although the author I was talking to, I do enjoy his work. He brings a lot of heart to it and writes a lot of interesting stuff. Um, but for the most part, fantasy leaves me cold. Robert Jordan stuff these are books I did not read on my own. I was assigned or asked to come in and adapt them. Now, of everything I've ever adapted, including The Hobbit, this was the most difficult works to adapt I've ever done because Jordan doesn't write comic book friendly prose. Um, there's long, long periods in his books where nothing visual happens. It's intrigue or people talking. I remember the first book I adapted, the first chapter is two women watching two other women read. It doesn't turn into comics. So what I would have to do is I would have to move events around, telescope events, which means collapsing them. All the events were there, but they were given less real estate than they had in the novel. And then anytime a battle was even mentioned, if a character was talking about a battle that might have happened 100 years ago, I showed it. I spent 4 or 5 pages in an action set piece showing that battle. And the idea was to give the universe resonance, but really the idea was to give the book eye candy, to give comics eye candy. Because the attraction to adapting a fantasy stuff is to, for the reader, I would imagine, is to see the stuff illustrated. And that's what comics are. They're illustrated stories. So I would try to give the artist as much visual grist as I could. And Jordan didn't make it easy. So, I kind of had to vamp a bit. But I never strayed from his work. I used his words. I'm always the invisible hand on adaptation. I never want to insert myself into an adaptation. So yeah, it was a tough. It was a tough gig. It was tough. I'm doing John Ringo's zombie novels now as graphic novels, and much easier because there's lots of stuff going on. Dr. Mask, he asks, I have been rebagging my comics and came across Batman 559, 560, Mr. Wayne Goes to Washington. Any thoughts on it? It may be one of the last Jim Apparos, and it's kind of looked like it was made as almost a recap of his career with a lot of pinup style pages. Yeah, I fondly remember these issues. These were they were Aftershock Road to No Man's Land issues. As we were preparing to go into the No Man's Land arc, and yeah, this was fun stuff. This was fun stuff to write, and all the issues are by Jim. And that final one, Mr. Wayne Goes to Washington, which you made reference to, um, they wanted, basically it had to be a story about Bruce Wayne testifying before Congress, which doesn't make for very exciting comics. If you've ever watched a congressional hearing on TV and didn't fall asleep, yeah, you're a better man than I am. Uh, so it would make deadly dull comics. So I came up with the idea of having it, you know, do the entire issue would be Bruce Wayne's testimony about himself and his involvement, what he did during Cataclysm, and all the rest of it, and how Gotham needed help from the federal government. But so he's testifying, and all of the captions in the story are his testimony. But the pages in the halls of Congress are interrupted by splash pages that review Batman's career. And in his testimony is serving as a plea for help for Gotham, but it's also for the reader serving the dual purpose of reviewing Batman's life. Now, the people at the congressional hearing don't realize this, but Bruce is speaking from the heart, and he's dealing with more than one subject at a time. And the splash pages gave Jim an opportunity, because we knew Jim was retiring, and this would be one of his last jobs. And this gave Jim just a showcase. So it turns out to be, a review narrated by Bruce Wayne of his life, but it's also kind of, Jim Apparo's greatest hits, which is cool. This was really, really cool. And I haven't looked at that issue in a long time, but I reread it to answer this question, and I'm kind of proud of it because it worked. The toughest thing about the issue was, to not have it feel padded out, to create basically an extended soliloquy for Bruce Wayne that was, effective and would, fit both his plea for Gotham, for the survival of Gotham, and as a review of his own life, a memoir, spoken memoir. So yeah, it was one of Jim's last regular jobs, although occasionally he would come back, and I wrote a lot of inventory stories for him, most of which never saw the light of day. I think I wrote 3 or 4 inventory stories, and then we did that arc on Legends of the Dark Knight, where the Joker meets Ra's al Ghul. And those were Jim's last jobs. I think I wrote all of Jim's last jobs. So there you go. And very proud to have done so. Was a big fan of his growing up. George Travlos. The DC Elseworld tales were popular for a little while. Some were very good, others were not. It's like anything else. I know you worked on a few Elseworlds tales. Did you like working within the imprint? Were there any Elseworld stories by other creators you really enjoyed? Yeah, Pirate Batman again. Yo-ho, Avast. He always shows up. Yeah, I mean, I got to do Pirate Batman, Captain Leatherwing with Al Catena. We got to do Batman as reimagined by Howard Pyle. I got to do Samurai Batman in one of the Robin annuals. That was a big kick. I also got to do futuristic science fiction stories with Batman. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then the Justice Riders, the Justice League reimagined as a Western, which I planned as a series. I wanted to do one of these a year, but I don't know what. I think my editor inherited this from a previous editor, and he had no interest in continuing. Now, of Elseworlds that I didn't work on that I liked, I really like Superman the Dark Side. It's a reimagining of the Superman mythos where Superman, instead of landing on Earth, lands on Apokolips and becomes the adopted son of Darkseid. And it's written by John Francis Moore, a writer who, I don't know, deserves a lot more attention than he gets these days. Just a solid writer who really got the characters, could write effective stuff with heart, and lots of action, and it would be true to the characterization. And this is just a hell of a series, and it's drawn by Kieran Dwyer, who I will talk of more later in this broadcast. And Kieran is he's the whole package. He's an excellent cartoonist, awesome draftsman, and just a hell of a comic artist all the way around. And just to put icing on the cake, it's inked by Hilary Barta, and Hilary, he brings his own vibe to the artwork, which just enhances Dwyer's stuff and brings it closer to a classic Kirby feeling without ever aping Kirby. So it's got that bravura, that oomph that anything set on Apokolips and in the fourth world should have, without being a send up or a pastiche. These two guys should have worked together more often. I will, and possibly will in the future, but they were a perfect match, particularly on this project, and I really dug it. And I enjoyed the story, the complications. I mean, you knew eventually there was going to be a comeuppance that Kal-El has built into him. The principles of his parents and principles he learned on Krypton, even as a baby. Just genetically, he's a good guy, so he's going to rebel against this frankly hellish environment of Apokolips and the evil things that he's expected to use, and how he's to bring his powers to bear on the dark side. It's just a great story, and everybody was at the top of their form, and it's by far my favorite Elseworlds. That brings us to George Travlos' other question. I know you've had several artists you've worked with in the past multiple times. Were there ever any artists you only worked with once you wanted to work with again and never had the chance? Be it either the camaraderie you shared or just the sheer brilliance of their work. If so, which artists and why? Well, Kieran Dwyer, again. I worked with Kieran a couple of times, 3 times to be exact, but I wanted to work with him more often. After Graham Nolan at DC and Eduardo Barreto, I most often asked for Kieran on projects. Because like I said, awesome cartoonist, awesome comic artist, and just a fantastic storyteller. And in particular, the annual we did that told the origin of the Riddler. It's a highlight of my career. It's one of my favorite stories that I wrote. And by that, I mean, it was one of the most fun, was because I had a lot of ideas about the Riddler, and I'd never been able to bring them out in a story previously. I've always, imagined what made this guy the way he is, because I always saw him as very different from the Joker. and it comes out in stories, the classic stories. He is different from the Joker, but never why, and in what precisely what way is he different than the Joker? And I really enjoyed writing him as, he's just a loser. The Riddler ultimately to me is a loser, and he's a guy who thinks he's hell of a lot smarter than he is, although he's pretty smart. But when his intellect fails, he cheats. So, and he's attracted to crime basically because he has a self-esteem problem, which isn't, helped along by being defeated by Batman so often. But yeah, I loved working with Kieran on this, and he just brings it. It to me, it was a perfect collaboration. I wished I'd worked with him more often. I brought him in on an issue of Nightwing because I did an issue of Nightwing in which we presented. Oh God, what was the character's name? It was the imitation Nightwing, and oh boy, I'm blanking on my own character's name. Ryerstad. His last name was Ryerstad. Uh, so I wanted to show the origin of the faux Nightwing, and I thought Kieran would be perfect for it, and he was. But the editor didn't like the work. He didn't get what we were doing at all. He didn't get how the story was presented, because the story was partially presented the way the real world saw Tad Ryerstad and the way he saw himself. And the editor didn't seem to get the juxtaposition. He didn't, although, to me, Kieran hit it way out of the park, did a terrific job. But we never worked together again after that. But we may in the future. We're still here. We're still working. We're still at the peak of our powers. Maybe Kieran and I will team up once again. But there you go. That's it for this week. All I ask, and it costs you nothing, all I ask is that you like this video. Just hit that old like button. Like me, please like me. How pathetic is this? But no, I want you to like the videos, and I want you to enjoy the experience here. And if you did, share it with others, because others want to know, and it helps spread the word on this little channel of mine, so that others can join me, and we can all deeply delve into the geekiness and nerdiness of comicdom each week. And the larger the audience, the more worthwhile this is for me to do. So you can help simply by liking what you just saw. And that's it. See you next week, and I'll see you down the road.